I'm David DeGuzman inside the NBC4 Digital Center for the latest edition of the Digital Sports Roundtable. We're continuing our year in review for sports in 2024, and here to help me out once again, digital producer Orri Benatar, as we take a look back at not Ohio State events, but the big events other than Ohio State that have happened so far this season. We say so far because there's like one big event that's happened that's going to happen that hasn't happened yet, but we'll get there. But of course, Columbus always brings such great events annually, including, of course, the Memorial. So I figured we should probably start there. Always such a memorable week over in Dublin, and this year was no different. And this year was one of those events where Scottie Scheffler has always been on the rise. He had won, what was it, the Masters by that point.
Yeah.
So he was basically the top golfer going into it. But I feel like at that point in the year, there was some question marks about like how good is Scottie Scheffler, and I feel like he answered all of those questions just in that one tournament. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's interesting about this year's Memorial was the fact that it happened a week later than it usually does, because they switched around the schedule a little bit. They wanted it before the U.S. Open for 2024. It's back to its normal slot that it's been at for the 50th anniversary in 2025, but it's nice that this Memorial tournament that happened in 24 was one of the main stepping stones of what was the year of Scottie Scheffler in golf. This guy had, I think, the best individual golf year someone's had probably since the peak days of Tiger Woods. And his play in Dublin was magical. Also, the Pro-Am was a lot of fun, getting to see Chris Pratt and Peyton Manning play and so many other celebrities and former sports stars. So it's always one of the best golf events. There's a reason it's considered a PGA Tour signature event. It's like right underneath a major. Scheffler just was able to play Muirfield so well. And once again, the Jack Nicklaus course proved to be a challenge for some guys, but it wasn't a challenge for the best golfer in the world as he took the crown.
Yeah, and I feel like it was something that we saw again and again from Scottie Scheffler after that. I mean, the Olympics was one of those events too, where it was like, oh, this feels very Memorial-like. So, and what's going into next year, it's going to be back in its traditional time slot, which is the week of Memorial Day. But looking forward to see what happens next year at Muirfield. But I have a feeling Scottie Scheffler might be another one of those names we'll be talking about for a while when it comes to Memorial Week. Let's move on to another event that doesn't always happen here in Columbus, and it was actually one of the first events I went to when I started here at NBC4. It was literally the same week, the U.S. Figure Skating Championships. I had to kind of dive back into what exactly happened that week, because it was literally almost a year ago. But it was really cool to have Nationwide Arena be a figure skating rink instead of the usual hockey rink. And we saw some names that I think we're going to be talking about as we start preparing for the 2026 Winter Olympics in Milan Cortina.
Yeah, no, it was really cool to see this kind of, we really haven't seen a figure skating event of this magnitude happen in Columbus. And you could hear former legends discuss it. Tara Lipinski, who was interviewed by our Whitney Harding, was talking about it and said, we've been to places all over the world, and Columbus was just one of those places that hadn't been hit on the calendar for a major figure skating event, and it brought a lot of excitement to the city. It was a great way for young aspiring skaters or people who love the Winter Olympics to kind of get a little bit of a taste 2 years ahead of time. So it just goes to show also that even these big Olympic sports, they want to bring themselves to Central Ohio. They want to have events in Columbus because it's just growing further and further as a place where you can get these big events, you can get these major events. You look at 2023, most ticket sales for March Madness, and then you look at 2024, and we'll continue to just see all these different sports having these grand events in our city.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the future. I know that NCAA tournament basketball is going to come back here in a few years. This past year, we also had the men's gymnastics national championships over at Cavelli. Next year, that same venue will also be hosting the men's volleyball national championship and the semifinals as well. So just to have an event like the U.S. Figure Skating Championships here, I thought was really cool. And also, I mean, again, the names that we saw, these are names we're going to be talking about in a couple of years' time. I mean, the champions this year, Ilya Malinin, Amber Glenn. I mean, Amber Glenn's having, by the way, if you haven't heard, Amber Glenn is having a phenomenal season right now. She just won the ISU Grand Prix of figure skating, which an American female has not done in a really long time, if at all ever. So she's definitely a name we're going to be looking out for next year. Soccer had quite the year here in Columbus, and I know you love talking about this, Orri. Let's start with the MLS All-Star game that took place here over at lower.com field. I thought it was a really fun event to have.
It's always a fun event to have. Third time Columbus has hosted it. I mean, it's been 19 years since, and it's kind of fun that you think of Columbus as hosting 3 MLS All-Star games now in 2 different venues and 3 different formats. Because we have the MLS Liga MX this year, and before we saw Fulham come to town for a European team to play, and then we had East versus West all the way back in 2000, a 9-4 game. I still remember watching that VCR when I was 6 years old. So, but no, it was a dream to go and cover that. And Skills Challenge was a lot of fun too. But
that was a lot of fun. That was the one event I got to go to because I was leaving for Paris right after, but I thought that was just really cool. I think for the casual sports fan or soccer fan, that was just really cool to see.
Yeah, and just the creativity in the events that they came up with. But I think the biggest thing from the All-Star game that kind of struck me, the pageantry was great. It was a nice way to kind of lead into the Leagues Cup because you had MLS facing the Mexican League before the Crew inevitably a month later hosted the final of that tournament, beating LAFC again in their own backyard. The biggest takeaway for me, though, is the fan reaction from the Crew players all playing. You know, Cucho scoring the only goal for the MLS in that one. Let's not forget, MLS lost that game 4-1. It was not a pretty sight for them, but, you know, seeing the fans rally behind the Crew players, 5 of them got to play in that game. Nancy was the coach, but also being able to see World Cup winners like Jordi Alba and Sergio Busquets play. Yeah, we missed out on Lionel Messi. We missed out on Luis Suarez, but even still,
he showed up eventually.
I missed that one, but Jordi Alba and Sergio Busquets, seeing them play, you know, you get to kind of experience the difference in, you know, the small skills that these players who grew up in Barcelona kind of learn, you know, from such a young age, and how they're translating that, you know, 25 years later. But an unbelievable event that led into an even bigger and better soccer event.
You're talking about the Aston Villa exhibition, right?
It's in there. It's a good one. Aston Villa is a Champions League, team right now.
That was a really great 3-week period that was in parallel to the Olympics happening. I mean,
that was
MLS All-Star. It was Aston Villa visiting to play the Crew in an exhibition, and then we had this huge matchup between Man City and Chelsea in the Shoe. And I think just having those two teams in a venue like that, a historic venue like that, I think that alone, take the Stars out for a second, I think that alone made for a pretty amazing experience.
Amazing experience. That's one of my favorite sporting experiences I'll have. The thing that got me with that game, and this is something I wrote about way back when in August, is you think of when Real Madrid and Paris Saint-Germain came here in 2016, fans are coming wearing whatever soccer jerseys they had. I could have sworn that we were at like a Manchester City game going to the Shoe that day, because it was a sea of sky blue, and then you had a whole bunch of Chelsea fans. So not just the fact that you have even more soccer fans here, now you have soccer fans here and around the state dedicated to a team. It's almost as if now they have a team. It's not just they're a fan of the sport. They have a team they root for, they watch week in and week out. So, and they got treated to see one of the best goal scorers in the world, Erling Haaland, score a hat-trick. Not a pretty game for Chelsea, but it's funny because Chelsea might have the last laugh here. They're having a very good season in the Premier League. Manchester City is in the midst of a tailspin they haven't had in, you know, over a decade now under Pep Guardiola. So I think they've had 1 win in their last 10 games or something. But, you know, Columbus is just continuing to grow as a soccer city. And then a few months after that, you know, hosting that OSU Michigan game in the college in the Big Ten college tournament, and then you had the NCAA tournament games here. So, not to mention all the big Crew games that happen here, from that Leagues Cup final, that Aston Villa game, to the CONCACAF Champions Cup games. We'll get to rerun all of that, and hopefully next year and in years to come also maybe add some USA games in there. She Believes Cup, USA Canada in April.
Gosh,
gotta add that in there. That was an unbelievable game, by the way. That was probably the most
that was so cool.
That was probably the most exciting game of the bunch. And even before then, you had the Brazil-Japan third place match. That was a good game too. Penalty shootout. You know, seeing Marta play, one of the best players I've seen play in person. But yeah, that USA Canada game, seeing Sophia Smith and Alex Morgan, and one of Alex Morgan's last games.
Yeah,
in her career,
because she didn't even make the roster for the Paris Olympics. I was there. You were there too, but I was there on the field, and that was such a close tight game. And I just thought, I remember the celebrations afterwards because it felt very elite. It felt like a World Cup-esque in a way, you know, with the trophy presentation and the players one by one getting their medals, and then there was like the fireworks and, you know, all that fun stuff. I thought that was a well-run event, and B, just, you know, shows how enthusiastic Columbus is about so many sports here, and it's not just football. Yes, football's king here, but it's just great.
And I think that's the real key thing with this city. As much as Ohio State football is the king of the city, you see soccer, figure skating, golf, all these different sports that aren't maybe in like that upper echelon in terms of popularity in this country get the kind of, you know, notice and ticket sales and people coming in, being enthusiastic about it, really enjoying it. That is great to see, because it's not just the fact that, Columbus loves its football and its basketball and those typical sports. They love every sport, and that variety to have in the city is really wonderful to see.
And I think it's only going to get bigger. And of course, you know, we have a really big game that's coming up. So at the time of this recording, the college football playoff first round game between Ohio State and Tennessee hasn't happened yet. Regardless of what happens, that's going to be an amazing atmosphere. The first December football game to ever take place at Ohio Stadium in its long history. And the fact that, of course, it's a playoff game, an SEC versus a Big Ten. I think, you know, whatever happens there, it's going to be fireworks, especially because it's under the lights, and there's nothing like December football. So looking forward to that. And of course, looking forward to seeing what other events Columbus will be hosting down the road. Orri Benatar, as always, great to have the conversation, and we'll see you next time on the NBC4 Sports Digital Roundtable.